choices shape the market, our society, and our quality of life. That's why Euroconsumers helps millions of people in their daily choices, providing simple solutions to complex problems. Euroconsumers is a cluster of organizations, a network of people, a group established to protect consumer rights and well-being that brings consumers and companies together in transparent relationships of trust that respect their independence. Our deep understanding of products and consumption gives consumers a credible, expert voice worldwide. We bridge the gap between buyers and manufacturers, between supply and demand. And in this digital age, we create opportunities for all parties to come together in constructive dialogue, partnering to build a future of better products and services. Euroconsumers has the power of a global group that believes humanity can develop, grow, and change for the better, and that we can promote this by uniting millions of consumers in strength and speaking responsibly for them while simultaneously engaging in relationships of trust with responsible, sustainable companies.
Welcome everyone, to everyone who's watching Start Talking Live and everyone who's looking at the recording. It's great to be back after our summer break, and today we've got a great autumn opener for you all about the future of some people's favourite food, meat. But not just any old meat, we're talking about new ways of producing meat by new technology, which some think will reduce the amount of land, water and energy that's currently used in food production, improve food security, meet the demands of a growing global population, but others may well disagree. And today we're going to find out about cultivated lab-grown meat and how it fits into the wider food revolution that we need for our planet. Euroconsumers will be live tweeting the event. You can follow along at #StartTalking. You can also follow at Euroconsumers on LinkedIn and X, formerly known as Twitter, for all the most important current and future consumer news. So please, if you're watching at home, pop your questions or comments into the box and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Now, first, the next thing to do is to introduce you to a really great mix of participants that are here with us today. We have with us Bruno Gautreich, who's Head of Unit for Food Processing Technologies and Novel Foods at the European Commission. Bruno deals with novel foods and their legislation. He's a veterinarian by training, but is now regularly involved in discussions related to cell-based food in the EU. So welcome, Bruno. Great to have you here.
Good afternoon.
Next, we have Christine Gould, who's the founder and CEO of Food for Thought. 10 years ago, Christine founded Thought for Food. I got it the wrong way around. I keep doing that. The organization is Thought for Food. It's a world leader in agri-food tech innovation. We're going to find out a bit about what that is. And in the last 10 years, Thought for Food has helped to launch and scale over 100 ventures, which are all designed to improve food systems across the world. She's also served on the UN Food Systems Summit Advisory Board and has written a book called The Changemaker's Guide to Feeding the Planet. So welcome, Christine. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Welcome.
Next, we've got Nick Jacobs, who's director of the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, or IPES Food for short. Nick's a specialist in agri-food trade and development policy. He's previously worked alongside Olivier de Schutter, who was the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food. And he's now director of IPES Food, co-chaired by Olivier and Lim Li Ching. IPES is a diverse panel of experts from 26 experts from over 5 continents, guiding new ways of thinking about research, sustainability, and food systems. Welcome, Nick. Great to have you here. Next, we've got Masami Takeuchi, who's from the Food and Agriculture Organization at the UN, probably better known to you as the FAO. She's a food safety officer, and she provides various food safety scientific advice to countries and the International Food Setting Body. Her main responsibility lies with the risk assessment of emerging technologies like cell-based food, biotech, gene editing, genome sequencing, precision fermentation, etc. We've only got time really to talk about the cell-based food part of that today, but it sounds like a fascinating role. So welcome, Masami.
Thank you very much. Greetings to
And our final panelist to introduce you to is Florentine Ziglowski, who's co-founder of Respect Farms. This is a farm which grows meat directly from animal cells, but on conventional farms. And the aim is to revolutionize agriculture and, crucially, to decentralize cultivated meat production. It's offering an alternative business model to farmers in cellular agriculture. She's also general manager of a non-profit organization called Cell Ag Germany, which is trying to advocate for an ecosystem of cellular agriculture in Germany, Europe, and beyond. So welcome to 5 really fantastic panelists coming from very different organizations. And now we're ready to start talking. I'm going to turn first to Florentine and ask her to explain in simple terms what we mean by cell-based or cultivated meat and how it works. So just the basics in a few minutes, please, Florentine. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you. First of all, to introduce the term cultivated meat, it's generally animal meat, so it's the real thing. It's not fake. It's just produced in a different kind of way. Directly from animal cells. So you eliminate the middleman called the animal out of the production chain. And how it basically works is you acquire and bank stem cells from an animal. You grow these in a different environment outside of the animal body. So that environment is called a bioreactor, or you can also call it a cultivator. And in that bioreactor, you simulate what happens inside of the animal body. So the cells of the animal are fed with cell culture media made of basic nutrients such as amino acids, glucose, vitamins, salts, and there are also growth factors. And over time, the cells grow because they double over time. So it's an exponential growth. And at a certain point, you harvest the cells. There are different ways to go about this. And in the end, you get products such as burgers and sausages and whatever you want to have, basically. The concept is not really new, so it's coming from the medical field. But also in food or in cultivating cells, you have different sectors such as you can cultivate plants, you can do leather, coffee, milk. So there's plenty of stuff you can do, not only cultivate meat. And why it's so efficient, or why it makes sense, is because with an input of 1.5 milliliters of tissue, you can make several tons of cultivated meat in a few weeks, in around 6 weeks, depending on the product you want to make. And as was already mentioned, it is environmentally friendly, so it takes up to 45% less energy, around 90% less greenhouse gas emissions, 99% less land, and up to 96% less water. And on top of everything, of course, you don't need to slaughter animals anymore for eating meat. There are different approaches how to go about it. So it's very diverse. And our concept is a more decentralized concept, as was already mentioned by Liz.
And we can talk about the concept of that in a bit later. Thanks for that introduction. So you're taking cells from an animal, reproducing the conditions that help that to grow, and then that can develop into a meal. And as your argument is, then that's going to reduce a lot of the resources that currently go into it. we're going to come back to all of it. We're going to be discussing all of this in more detail. I'm just going to come to Nick for some opening thoughts. Can you tell us a bit more about IPS food's purpose? So your sort of bigger goals, bigger picture, and whether you think there's a place for novel foods like cultivated meat, but also other proteins and things that can be cultivated in this way in trying to achieve the changes that you want to see.
Thanks very much, Liz. Yeah, so IPES Food's purpose is essentially to support the transition to sustainable food systems around the world. And you mentioned already we have 25 experts in our panel. They come from all different disciplines. So we have social scientists, agronomists, development economists, political scientists, and also from different types of knowledge. So we have people, practitioners from civil society, farmers as well. And the point of bringing all that knowledge together is that really changing food systems is incredibly complex. This is a complex system with lots of moving parts. So we need all of those different types of knowledge to be able to change that system and move it in the right direction. And our purpose is really to try and take all of the vast scientific evidence that's out there and to really organize that evidence to show what it's really saying and to translate that into clear policy recommendations. So we're very much along the lines of what a think tank might be doing, but with this expert panel. And when it comes to looking at this question of novel foods, like with any question, what we ask first of all is, why are we asking this question rather than others? And what are the things we need to do first of all? And what are the things we can do that are really win-wins to advance towards sustainable food systems, knowing what we know about the complexity of this system, knowing that there are these huge power imbalances in this system as well. And when we ask that question and think about diet shifts, our first thought is that, well, there's so much we can and should be doing already to change food production, to change consumption based on the foods that are available to us today. So that's, increasing the amount of legumes we consume, moving away from this bizarre situation where globally we get pretty much half of our calories from just 3 crops. There's so much that can be done to change that, to make agriculture more sustainable. So those are the way we approach this question is to say, first of all, what can we do today to improve the food systems we have in a way that will deliver benefits across all the dimensions of sustainability and will allow us to address and remedy the power relations we see. Okay. Then when we look at novel foods, we see that as certainly part of the discussion as well. But our initial concern is that these are complex questions that might bring in trade-offs, might lead to more concentration of power, when our first priority is to look at ways that we can change today's food system in a way that delivers that win-win-win.
Okay, that's really interesting. And it's often the case, isn't it, that when things are really hard to fix and improve, we look for something that maybe looks more exciting and futuristic. But I hear what you're saying. There's actually a lot that could be done in terms of production and consumption that can also improve and make things much more sustainable. Christine, so Thought for Food describes itself as an innovation engine for food systems and climate change. It sounds like you've got very similar goals to Nick. How do you see the role of cultivated meat in creating this, and what other innovations are out there?
Yeah, thanks. As you rightly pointed out, we do have a lot of systemic challenges that we need to address right now. And one of the big ones is indeed, of course, climate change, but also the protein gap and the, nutrient angle of our food system. And so, in fact, we need all hands on deck to be thinking about how we can deliver more nutrition and particularly protein to people all over the world. And so building on, the last point, we do need to be looking at all types of solutions. And so that can include regenerative livestock agriculture, but also this future frontier around cultured meat. And what we're seeing is, in the space of entrepreneurship, that there's a lot of innovation and excitement around this technology. And we're just at the very cusp of, what's possible. So, for example, as you talked about with Florentine at the beginning, this technology is about growing cells, right, into real meat. And or materials, leather. There's a plethora of products that can be made in this way. But there's a whole bunch of infrastructure that also needs to be developed and innovated around to bring this technology to the fore in a way that's cost effective, in a way that's going to make it accessible to the average consumer. So we're seeing entrepreneurs jumping in to help enable, not just the output of the cultured meat or biomaterial, but also around scaffolding technology, growth medium serums. We need to have food essentially for the cells to grow and proliferate and have those feedstocks innovated. And yeah, this is kind of a space that we see there's a lot of excitement, particularly with the next generations. Governments are moving in on the action. Places like Singapore and the United States have already set up regulatory frameworks to allow this to happen. I actually am based in Switzerland usually, and Switzerland has received its first regulatory approval dossier. So it will kickstart that process with an Israeli company. So yeah, I think it's, time will tell. There is a consumer acceptance angle that we need to take on. I think we're going to dive into that topic a bit. But innovation is hot right now. But equally, I just want to say, building on the last point, we're also seeing a lot of innovation around the other side of, animal meat production. And that's like traditional livestock agriculture and how we can reduce methane emissions and make that more climate friendly. And we need all of these solutions right now. It's not either or, it's both, so that we can really address these unprecedented challenges that we're facing in radical ways that we need to regenerate our planet's ecosystems and solve the challenges of the climate emergency.
Great. It sounds like a really exciting space to be in at the moment. I'm just going to come back to Masami now at the FAO. So the FAO uses the term cell-based food for this type of meat. Now, you're involved in a lot of different food innovations. How long has cell-based food been around?
Okay, thank you very much for the good question. First of all, that this cell-based food is our working terminology. So I guess that we can come back to the terminology issue later, but then it has been decided after long discussions and long processes. So, but then still, this is a working terminology for us. And then I think that the first lab-grown experiment-wise of cell-based food product was developed by Dutch researcher in 2013. So I would say that is the starting point. But as many of you may already know, that Winston Churchill already explained about this wish of having this type of meat coming out of the cell growth already in 1931. So the idea has been there, but then actual practical implementation experiments happened in 2013. And then the first time that I was consulted more constructively from the government agency, it was in Singapore, was 2017. So relatively new, but then I would say that ideas have been there for quite a while.
Okay. So yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? 2017, and that doesn't seem that long ago.
No.
You picked up there on what we call the term, and I found it really interesting starting to research this topic. There's so many different words. Do you think that's important? I'd like to ask all of you what you like to call this type of meat and why it's important.
can I just comment on that one? I mean, I have to say that I cannot emphasize more that this is such an important issue, that the people think that the nomenclature is a social issue, but it is not. When we think about the regulatory issues, that is the first thing that we have to sort out. And then unfortunately, we don't have an internationally recognized, accepted term at this moment. And then nothing is really perfect. And then I found out that nothing is really scientific, even cell-based food that I am using. So I think that there could be some very good discussion around nomenclature. And then imagine that we have 6,500 languages existing. So if we think about translating into something else, then it's going to create a lot of complex issue.
Okay, Florentine, I know you prefer cultured meat. Why is that so important?
Well, nomenclature, I think, is definitely important because people care about what they put into their mouth. And frankly said, if it doesn't sound very appealing, I wouldn't put it into my mouth, such as like lab-grown meat, apart from the fact that it's misleading because it might have been experimented with in the lab, but the actual production of any technology happens outside. So I think cultivated meat, so that would be my preferred term. That's also what consumers say they prefer that the most. I think it's the most accurate. You could add cell cultivated. That's maybe even more accurate, although it becomes longer. I think cell-based, if you say cell-based, you definitely have to say cell cultivated, because if you take a piece of meat, then there are also cells in there, and then it would mean that in a piece of meat there are no cells, which would be also misleading. So I stick to cultivated meat.
Okay, maybe we'll return to others later. I've just got a question coming in that I'd like to put to the panel from Alessandro. It's wealthy countries consume too much meat, which poses a health problem. Cultivated meat doesn't really address this. So what's the panelists' take on the health dimension of excessive meat consumption? Does anybody want to take that?
Well, I can say something about it. I completely agree that we have to eat less meat, and it would be a perfect world if we would all become vegetarian or vegan, but it's just not happening. So we have to come up with another alternative. And as cultivated meat can be customized, you can also adapt what's in there. So you could, for example, have a different protein profile in there, so it's customizable, which is a benefit of that technology.
Okay, I think there is something really interesting in that question as well about the difference, the way that wealthy countries view food and see it versus other countries where security and nutrition is such a huge problem. But we'll come back to that a bit later. I want to bring in Bruno here. Your role at the European Commission, can you tell us a bit more about that and how the Commission is thinking about novel foods generally and cultivated meat?
Yeah, first, thank you for inviting me and giving the views of the Commission on this indeed very interesting topic. As you know, may know, we have a legislation on novel foods, which is relatively recent. It is applicable since 2018, so rather young legislation, and it deals in particular with what we name, or EFSA names, cell culture derived foods. And I would concur that the issue of terminology is really key. We only have 24 languages in the EU, but that would be also a challenge to find the right name which can be used in several member states. We have a legislation. We in the Commission will be the ones receiving the applications from operators. By the way, there has not been anyone received yet. We expect that it would come in around 6 months now, probably the first one. From there, we see if the application is valid. If it is, we transmit to EFSA. EFSA will give a scientific opinion, mainly about safety. That's also the purpose of this novel food legislation, is to check the safety of the product. When we get a favorable opinion from EFSA, then we submit a draft, or we discuss with member states, and we submit a draft regulation, a draft authorization, discussed in several working groups to reach an agreement or a text that can be agreed by member states, because at the end of the process, you need a vote by the member state with a qualified majority to get a product approved. And then you have, as a risk manager, to define the specifications, the labeling, the name on the label, so labeling characteristics. So all these questions have to be included in the authorization. So what does the Commission think about it? I would say we have this legislation and we'll apply it, obviously. We have no preconceived idea about culture meat, but we think there are still questions to be answered about safety, and that's EFSA's role, I would say, but also about the environmental footprint, the consumer's perception and acceptance, the capacity to upscale production. It seems to be also a big question, and the sustainability. We hear a lot of facts or figures, but let's say we need solid evidence about these. So, and by the way, we will launch a study probably next year with focus groups of consumers to learn more about the perception they have of these products, the names they could live with. That will help us, let's say, define the way the authorization would be granted.
That's great, thank you. We're lucky enough to have the FAO here, who has looked in detail at the safety, not so much at the other issues you mentioned, but the safety of cell-based food. Can you just very quickly tell us why food standards are so important and how they work, and then talk a bit about the report that you've just put out and what you found?
Sure, happy to. Basically, that starting with the standards, I think that there are different levels of standards existing. For example, like Bruno is saying, that the European Union, they have this regional or supranational level of the standards, but then FAO does deal with this international level of the standards, which is the Codex Alimentarius Commission's Codex standards, which is the international food standards, but then not really in a way that binding with the regulations, but more like a voluntary standards. But then still, it is extremely important because with the two very key objectives. One is the protection of the consumer health, and then another one is facilitating the fair practices of trade. So those are the two main dual objectives of the Codex international standards. And then the importance of the standards is because this will provide some sort of a very basic bottom line to all the countries, that what are the issues, and then what do we need to look into, then what kind of data would support this kind of standards. Those entire picture of the standard setting is really providing every single country the basis of protecting the consumers, and then mainly for the food safety, but then also other relevant, very legitimate issues like nutrition, quality, and then many different things. So this is the key importance of standards. And then following up on your the question about what we have done on this cell-based food and food safety issues, what we did was this milestone publication that we published with our partner agency, WHO. We put together those 3 items into one big publication. Of course, the core part of the publication is the hazard identification, which is only first step of the 4 steps of the risk assessment procedures. There's a formal risk assessment procedures, which include exposure assessment, which we are not able to conduct because there is not so much exposure at this moment. So what we were able to do is a hazard identification of the potential food safety issues of the cell-based food production. So this is the core element of the publication. But then, of course, that we have put together the very basic, but then also very comprehensive literature synthesis on some very key issues. I would say preliminary issues, but then super important terminology, and then production process explanation, and then current state of the art of the regulatory frameworks around the world. And then I know that I am talking to the Europe centric audience today, but then I think that it is important to highlight that we have so many countries with so many different regulatory frameworks. And then we have analyzed various different regulatory frameworks. Very interesting things is that they are all different. And then it is great that I appreciate that the difference, but then inside of it, if you really look into it, food safety assessment is core of those regulatory framework. And then they always put the high importance into the food safety assessment of such food production. So I think that this is highlighted in the publication. And then put together everything with the advice to the regulatory authority about how they can consider the communicating with the consumers so that and then consumer won't get confusions. So this is our publication.
That sounds great. It's very relevant to the question that came in from Gregory, saying are discussions underway between the EU, US, and other countries? I mean, we can take this. Are there discussions between countries about how to regulate this industry?
Yeah, in fact, that the FAO organized this technical working group around the world. I have at least 15 different countries joining this technical working group, those regulators talking to each other, basically very scientific, very technical. And then it is very enriching discussions because the experiences are shared. And then I think that this is the beauty of this international discussion. We will be able to learn from each other. So it is happening.
That's great. Good to hear. I hope that answers your question, Gregory. Bruno, well, we know the FAO is based in Rome, and Italy has famously banned synthetic meat. It also, remember, banned ChatGPT for a while as well. So I'm just thinking, does Europe's more precautionary approach mean that we might be left behind as these innovations develop?
I would say that a clear no as an answer to your question. The novel food legislation has been made to promote and support innovation, and that's what we try to do. I'm not saying that will be an easy path because it's a quite innovative products. The safety assessment will be a challenge by EFSA, and the challenges we enumerated will be there also to address. But no, there is a real need for innovation in Europe. And we think that the novel food regulation supports that. But as I said, we need the support of member states, or at least a majority of them. So it's true that we need to discuss with several countries, including Italy, to make sure that when we come to a decision, then it's shared by most of them and can be implemented at EU level.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come back to Christine now, and what's great, we are based, Euroconsumers is a European organisation, but we're really lucky today to have organisations who are working across the world, and obviously food systems are global in nature. So can you tell us a bit about how the attitudes and experiences around the startups you're working with, but also around maybe consumer attitudes, etc., are different with the different ventures that you've been working with?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in my organization, we were kind of the pioneers of bringing the next generation of entrepreneurs into the space. So we do actually specifically work with millennial and Gen Z innovators who are also consumers around the world. And as I mentioned earlier, they tend to have a more open mind to these types of technologies and the beneficial role that they can play in the food system. But that said, they are pushing for us to do better. So indeed, when we talk about regulation, we, of course, want to have harmonization across countries, and we want to have, food safety as assessed with traditional meat, right? That comes from animals. But in this case, the entrepreneurs are thinking, how can we do better? And I think someone asked earlier about like the meat consumption and the nutrition angle of this. And that is indeed what some innovators are looking at. Can we actually make this meat healthier for you? Can we improve the protein content and amino acids and vitamins and micronutrients so we can have a net positive impact? And that's another area when we talk about net positive, it's not only for health and nutrition and for people, but also for the planet. And so, as I mentioned, there's this whole process about how to bring cultured meat products and cultured fish products and biomaterials to the market. But part of this, we really do need to look at the environmental impact. And right now, for example, the purification process is something that, there have been some studies out that are questioning the GHG emissions because it is very energy intensive. And so we're seeing innovators coming in to say, how can we do better here? And also fetal bovine serum is used as a growth medium. And again, innovators are coming in and say, how do we do better? If we really want this meat to, be free of animals and animal harm so that we can address the ethical angles, how can we implement plant-based alternatives, for example? So they're really, entrepreneurs and innovators are looking at every part of this and thinking to themselves, how do we do better than what we have? And so I know that it's going to perhaps create some complications for the regulatory side of things, because on regulation, people want to look at things in a way that is analogous to what we currently have, right? And do that type of comparison. But, this is a chance of a lifetime to go beyond, right? And not just sustain the status quo, but do better. And this is where innovators are really being creative and coming up with solutions. But it's also really important to remember we need time to do this. And so, the question of today about, is this just another fad? I am very, very passionate about not making this something that is overly hyped and, where the media promises the world. We need time to do this, and we need time to do this right and well. And yes, this is a technology that has been around for decades, but it's really now kind of, seeing a lot more people become interested and involved. And it's really important that the investment community understands this, the regulatory community understand this, and consumers understand this. And that's a key role for the media to play in really being realistic about the headlines they put out and the timelines that are going to happen. And of course, the questions that still remain about how to make this, type of meat, cultured meat, available and affordable to our world's people.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Well, let's hope the media take their responsibilities seriously on that. Nick, can I just bring you back in as we're talking about this international differences in terms of regulation or startups or whatever? You're working with countries and people in incredibly different environments and situations than I can even imagine. So what's your take on that this is going to sort of solve problems of nutrition and climate?
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, I think I would definitely agree with a number of things Christine just said, and particularly the need to avoid hype and misleading claims that this is, going to solve world hunger, that it's going to deliver solutions straight away that are relevant for all regions of the world. And certainly in our organization's work on this topic, we've been really clear to differentiate the problems and the solutions that are relevant in a global north context from a global south context as well. And if you look, at the problems we're trying to solve in some of the poorest parts of the world, livestock looks very different than it looks in the global north. And this is often the main or the only livelihood people can have on marginalized land, and certainly better than some alternative land uses. The livestock sector can also be a way to provide fertility for crops as well, where people don't have access to other modes of fertility. So first of all, the problems are different, and really for many poorer populations, having a small amount of additional meat in their diet, that sort of high quality proteins might be really what they need. And so whereas in Europe and parts of the global north, I think we would certainly say we need less and better meat, and we need to look at solutions like alternative proteins. We can't make that kind of a generalization in the global south. And if I may, Liz, just to say a bit more about some of the risks that we see with alternative proteins, including lab meat. or sorry, cultivated meat, to use the sort of agreed terminology for today. And the first thing to say is that these are risks; they're not sort of proven impacts, and I think we can all agree to be cautious around this area. But we do see some risks, particularly when we zoom out and we think about the whole food system and the food systems that we know we need to build in the future. And I think the first set of risks are really around concentration of power and this risk of reinforcing an industrial food system that we know is not delivering what we need it to today. And what makes us concerned here is that although there are many startups in this sector, we're also seeing some of the biggest meat companies around the world investing in lab-grown meat. So you have firms like Cargill, who are behind Aleph Farms. You have another big meat firm in the US, Tyson, linked to Future Meat Technologies. So a number of the kind of leading firms in this space are really backed up and financed by some of the leading meat firms. And then behind that, you also have big financial interests, a number of actors who certainly have not proven to really have an interest in building sustainable food systems in the longer term. So that would make us concerned about the type of sector we're creating and about really exacerbating the power relations we see in food systems today. And just to give an example of what that leads to, companies, with a lot of power are able to really influence and set the agenda and even influence the way these discussions take place in media and public discourse. And there was a recent study that showed that 75% of media articles on cultivated meat were prompted by an industry source, and this coverage was broadly favorable to industry perspectives. So just to say that there are risks here that we go down the same avenues we've gone down with the food system as it is now, where we have very powerful companies who are able to really co-opt the innovation, buy up the small companies, and drive this sector in a way that may not lead to sustainability in the longer term. So those are certainly risks that we think are really, really worth considering.
Does anyone else want to bring in any other risks that they're at front of their minds? This one very much about the centralization and different needs.
Yes, Liz, I can talk about a little bit about the food safety risks. So, but then can I just explain the difference between hazard and risks? Because sometimes it's very difficult to differentiate. So I usually use the example of electricity, and then voltage itself is a hazard, right? Because we can get some sort of dangerous situation with the high voltage. But then we have a safe installment of the electricity so that the risk will go down. So this is how we think about the risk. And then in food safety, we think that the hazards exist, hazard just there. But then how we can make the hazard to become high risk, this is the food safety management. And then I usually work on this situation that the people get so surprised to see the long list of hazards we identify. But then what I want to say is that the risk is something that the people can manage. And then only thing that really, really important here when we talk about food safety risks is that we are prepared. We have a tool to identify the potential hazards, and then we have a tool to assess the risk and manage the risk. So this is the entire thing that I want to highlight, that how we consider at FAO and WHO the risk assessment and then also risk management. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We've got a question from the audience about transforming the livestock industry and the people who work in it. And this links up really closely with Florentine and Respect Farms, because you told us at the beginning, Florentine, what cultivated meat is and how it's made, but you're also trying to do something more transformative to the system. Can you please talk about that and why that's so important?
Yes, sure. I think it also has something to do what the others have said about concentration of power and big companies investing. So a little bit of history, I think, would be good. there was Mark Post presenting the first ever cultivated meat burger 2013. But there was also something in between Churchill and Mark Post. And one of the key people in this industry is a guy called Willem van Eelen. And he's a Dutch entrepreneur, or he was a Dutch entrepreneur. And he set up the first ever publicly funded research grant on cultivated meat. And surprisingly, the outcome was how farmers can make cultivated meat. And that was in 2008. But there, because of the cultivated meat burger, of course, the media picked that up, and it became a very popular new technology, and big companies think they can make a lot of money with it. But the results remained, and we picked it up because at a certain point we saw that everyone's talking about big factories, centralized models, and I completely agree that there's a risk that it could lead to a concentration of power. Although I am also quite sure that cultivated meat will happen, and it's in our hands to produce it in a way that we want it to be, and that means that we have to design it in a way that we want it to be. So we started Respect Farms and involving farmers in this transition model. Also because we think there are different ways to go about cultivated meat. I think there are reasons for doing it big, but there are also reasons for doing it decentralized, and it will coexist and it will help each other. And I also think it will help the plant-based world and the overall food system to democratize that system. And a small comment on like a final comment on this with the big corporate investors investing in cultivated meat. To add on a risk is the risk of nations not investing into cultivated meat. So there is public money needed. That is a risk. So that's why all these companies go to big companies to get money, because there's not enough public money, and it could all be open access, and we would be much further if there was more public research on this.
That's an interesting point. And there's other ways that opening up data can help. I think you mentioned one of the key things to crack, which is the media that the meat grows in. I hope I'm using the right term. Can you talk about that?
The cost factor of this?
Opening up data between different researchers on
that. You mean the costs on it?
Yeah.
So, well, there 30% on it is on the media. So definitely that has to be reduced, the costs of it. But a big part of the cost is very often that it's farmer grade. So we have to make it food grade. So in that particular case, also farmers can play a role. Although I have to say we see a bigger picture of it. So not only making the plants that we in the end process to make it feed for the cells, but also that they become part of the chain as food producers. Because let's not forget, farmers make our food at the moment, and if we cut out the current food producers, who's going to make our food?
Exactly. Okay. Coming towards the end, but Bruno, I just wanted to ask you about the Commission and this huge challenge it's committed itself to of achieving really big climate goals and the cross-departmental Green Deal. This includes food, but it includes mobility, health, I mean, so many things. So how does your department and the unit you work in looking at food work with other departments across the Commission to link up food security, nutrition, with sustainability goals? And I think it's a bigger question about how do we practically join these things up?
Yeah, it's true that it's a huge challenge, and we have this Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy, and indeed, as part of it, this framework for sustainable food systems. It's not my unit, by the way, which is dealing with it, but first, there is a discussion inside Santé about the necessity to produce food and then novel foods, but also the balance with health. And we have discussion inside the food part of the Director General, for sure, also with our health colleagues. But as you mentioned, we have to work with DG Agriculture, with DG for Fisheries, with DG for Industry. And this is all, I would say, a daily work, which is let's say bilateral, but also with what we name inter-service groups, and then trying to reach agreement and compromises very often, because the discussions you find outside in the society, we have inside also in the Commission to try to find, let's say, a right balance. But it's true that we need also farmers on board, for example, and that anything we would do can be very nice on paper, but then we have to confront it to the people who will have to implement it. And I'm not sure I understand the question about the people in the livestock production, but indeed, that's we certainly have to factor that in. And again, it's a lot of discussions as usual. With the Commission, it's rather slow and not always as transparent as people would be or as quick, but it progresses. And if it's not all done with this Commission, I'm sure that's a topic which will remain also for the next Commission.
I think that, thank you. I think that's what Christine mentioned, like we need a framework for steady progress. Right, I'm going to ask all of you a closing question, and you don't have to answer this with reference to cultured meat if you don't think it's relevant. But I'd like to know what you each think needs to happen to achieve a climate-friendly, people-respecting, healthy, secure food future. Just a small little question at the end. Nick, can I come to you first, please?
Sure. I mean, so many things need to happen. Obviously, I'm going to try to zone in on one here. I think more important than any specific technology or innovation is the overall framework we have and getting the right policy frameworks in place. And that's why the EU Farm to Fork strategy is important. This is for the first time something that looks like a holistic strategy for our food system to guide it into the future, to set these big objectives, to lay down that we need diets to shift. We're going to be phasing out or phasing down pesticides and fertilizers and give this sense of the direction we're going. This is crucial. That's why it's worrying that the Farm to Fork strategy is facing some opposition now, and it really does need to move forward. It's essential. And in other parts of the world, we see other really holistic strategies starting to come together. The Brazilian government under Lula now has adopted a really wide-ranging set of anti-hunger policies, also to support smallholder farming and agroecology. These are the kind of big structures we have to get right. And within those policy frameworks, we have to be clear on the need for innovation for the public good and set those incentives correctly, and then the innovation will follow.
Thank you. So we need some big leadership with some big overarching ideas. Masami, what do you think?
Yes, thank you. I think that the most important thing that should be happening is actually this dialogue and exchange of the views. I think that we have different types of people, different stakeholders, and different perspectives. And then I think that the importance is that we collect those kind of views and then initiatives. And then also if there are concerns, I think it has to be put on the table. And then we have to start talking about it. And then one thing that I am very happy about having done this hazard identification for the food safety is that now that the people can really talk about very important other issues than food safety, because if food safety is kept as a concern, people cannot go out of this sphere, because food safety is such an important thing. And if the food is not safe, people cannot talk about any other things like sustainability and environmental impact. So I think that this is the opportunity that we can really talk about the real issues. And then I think that this dialogue is really contributing to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're very glad you're part of it. Florentina, come to you next.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what has been said. To add on that, it's maybe not always fancy, but we don't always have to destroy to create something good. We can reuse infrastructure that is currently there and use what's good and not use what has not been good. And to add on the collaboration and talking to each other, we should understand that all the different pathways can enhance each other, and cultivated meat can accelerate the plant-based adoption and vice versa. So it's really about a holistic model that we have to focus.
Okay, great. Bruno?
Yeah, I would really concur with Masami also that there is a need for a rational, if possible. We know it's very difficult, but public debate based on evidence, and that's will be the challenge for us. Indeed, is to answer, let's say, the consumers' demand and make sure that what we do is sound. And for this, we need data, we need this dialogue and respect for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm really interested in the research you mentioned that you're going to be carried out on consumer attitudes, because I don't know how many people have actually tried cultivated meat. We're not sure, so that would be fascinating. Christine, I'll leave the last closing to you. What needs to happen next?
Yeah, thanks. I just think all of the comments that have been made are exactly right. What encourages me is that we're now talking about food and the concept of systems. We have our food systems, but our food systems are part of our environmental systems, our climate systems, our economic systems, our social systems, our cultural systems. And all of these are very complex and interrelated. They're affecting each other and affected by each other. And in that complexity is actually opportunity. And so I think that going forward, we have the opportunity to ask new questions, to have new types of conversations. And that's why I'm really encouraged by some of the things that Florentine is doing, because, you know, we don't have to have either or scenarios and winners and losers. We can have new types of scenarios where farmers benefit from new technologies and approaches, where we have decentralization, where we have net positive outcomes for people and the planet. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. And so I think we should embrace it. And this is, you know, there's a lot of hard questions to be asked. But if we, you know, are brave enough to do that and push ourselves to be creative, and also realize that this is just one technology that's going to solve, you know, part of the problem, but we need all hands on deck everywhere to be thinking about the rich variety of solutions that are needed. We have a chance of kind of getting out of the, you know, doom and gloom that we face right now. So thanks for this really important conversation, everyone. I learned so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody who's joined the discussion today. It's been more fascinating than I even imagined, and I thought it would be great. I think we've learned, like you say, a lot about systems and the need to look at these things systematically. Hype around new technology, which is true whether it's food or whether it's AI. We've learned very much about the safety and about how we need to create a framework which can respect these technologies to grow at a steady pace and to make sure that they are indeed public interest and serve what the public need as well as what our climate needs. So thanks to Christine, Bruno, Florentine, Nick and Masami for a very fruitful discussion of some very meaty issues. For everyone watching live, watching back and joining in. Every month our webinars pick a key consumer issue from crypto to inflation, influencer marketing to ChatGPT. You can watch them all back at euroconsumers.org/webinars, and you can follow Euroconsumers on Twitter and LinkedIn to keep up with all the latest consumer news and views. And we look very much to the future and are thinking about how innovation is affecting consumers across the world. So thanks everyone so much for your time this afternoon, and everyone who's listening at home. And please share it with anyone else who you think might like to hear this discussion. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Well, goodbye.
Power to the people, someone used to sing. And while singing is not our expertise, empowering people, empowering you is what we do. And in tune. How? We test, analyze, and compare products and services to ensure that they meet what you are looking for and comply with the law. We inform, advise, support, and represent consumers, and we do this in chorus, which is to say in several countries at the same time. Belgium, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Brazil. Then we dialogue, collaborate, and sue companies if needed to make sure people's and your needs are in the best hands. And in the end, we improve the market and we all win. Maybe it does deserve a song. What do you think? Euro Consumers. Empower people, improve the market.